My reflections today, I gave it the title, Repairing the World Through Deep Listening, the Well-Placed, Respectful Question. Back when I was probably a moody adolescent, my mother announced to the family that she had read an article about how to talk to your teenager. The answer, according to the article, was to ask questions. Of course, since I knew it all, I thought that was the dumbest thing I had ever heard. But after school, instead of heading to my room or talking on the phone, I would find myself on a stool in my mother's kitchen, engaged in conversation with my mom, brought in by her thoughtful question. Crossing the breach. Maybe the magazine had it right. Maybe asking a question makes a difference. This summer in Hawaii, I was having lunch with a good friend. We had both been to a memorial service for an artist friend a couple of weeks earlier. At one point during our luncheon, my friend shared thoughts that to me were confusing. She said, all of a sudden, "You are an introvert." "I am," I replied. "And yet, at the memorial reception, I saw you talking to a lot of people." "You did?" I said. "You were working the room." "I was?" "Yes," she said, "and I am an extrovert. I expect everyone to come talk to me since I am the center of attention. No one came to talk to me. They were talking to you." I really did not know what she was talking about. But later, reflecting on the memorial service, I remembered speaking with people as I was trying to find out practical information about David's paintings and where they could be found. I really wanted some note cards of his paintings because mine were all gone. Folks were happy to share with me as I gathered the information I sought. It was nothing special. Then I remembered the woman sitting next to me early on. We were both silent, waiting for events to happen. I felt I should say something, so I got up my courage and I asked, "How did you happen to know David?" Her response was immediate and full, and I listened. She had a lot that was on her heart. Excuse me. Our theme this week is repairing the world through deep listening. What does that entail? Those who study deep listening tell us to be present, to be patient, to be open, and to connect with ourselves. And I propose something more. The listener, the receiver, is not passive. The listener may, in fact, be the initiator. I suggest that a well-placed question can help start the process. Sometimes that question can communicate that the listener is indeed listening. Earlier this month, when Larry and I arrived at a family reunion in northern Washington state, we were hit with the news that our niece and husband were separating. This was a true shock, given the religious background of the couple and their 4 beautiful children still in school. What had happened? No one would say anything. The group went ahead with the planned activities and pretended like everything was okay. But one of my sisters at one point very quietly asked my niece, "What can you share?" And the floodgates opened. The two of them, the young woman and the older woman, slipped away to a quiet place. One spoke, the other listened, deeply listened. She was present and patient. She connected with her own spirit, and she posed the question that brought the two together. I will close with sharing one of my favorite stories from Joseph Campbell, who you recall, I have to get that verb right, or that grammar right, who you recall wrote about the power of myths and metaphors. In this story, Gawain, a knight errant, a wandering knight, happened upon a kingdom that was suffering. The crops were dying, the trees were dead, all was bleak and hopeless. What was the matter? He asked the villagers, "What's going on?" "The king is sick and can't be healed," was the reply. So Gawain asked to see the king. Of course, he was denied, but Gawain persisted, and when he approached the king, he posed the question, "What ails thee, uncle?" I love these words. They tell us so much. Before the great linguistic shift, shortly after Shakespeare's time, English had two forms for you, the second person. French, Spanish, German have these two forms today, of course, and many other, probably European languages mainly. Thou was the informal form, the intimate. You was the formal and the plural. Of course, in addressing the king, Gawain should have used the formal you, like, "What ails you?" But he did not. He used the familiar, the intimate, "What ails thee?" They were equals. Furthermore, Gawain addressed the king not as "Your Majesty," but as uncle, a kinship term, familiar yet respectful. I can note that in modern Hawaiian culture, uncle and auntie are terms used to address all older people, whether related or not. Again, showing care and respect. And the king responded to the question and started telling his story to a good listener. The king recovered. The crops started to grow, the flowers to bloom, the trees to leaf. All was well. I suggest to you to consider the power of the well-placed, respectful question to support deep listening and setting the world aright. And now our reading for today. Our reading is from the book, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Other People Deeply and Being Deeply Seen, by David Brooks. He writes, "The worst kind of questions are the ones that don't involve a surrender of power, that evaluate. Where did you go to college? What neighborhood do you live in? What do you do? They imply, I am about to judge you." Closed questions are also bad questions. Instead of surrendering power, the questioner is imposing a limit on how the questions can be answered. For example, if you mention your mother and I ask, "Were you close?" then I limit your description of your relationship with your mother to the close, distant framework. It's better to ask, "How is your mother?" That gives the answerer the freedom to go as deep or as shallow as he or she wants. A third sure way to shut down conversations is to ask vague questions like, "How's it going?" "What's up?" These questions are impossible to answer. They're another way of saying, "I'm greeting you, but I don't actually want you to answer." Humble questions are open-ended. They're encouraging the other person to take control and take the conversation where they want to go. These are questions that begin with phrases like, "How did you?" "What's it like?" "Tell me about." "In what ways?" In her book, You're Not Listening, Kate Murphy describes a focus group moderator who was trying to understand why people go to the grocery store late at night. Instead of asking directly, why do you go to the grocery store late at night, which can sound accusatory, she asked, tell me about the last time you went to the store after 11 o'clock p.m.
Repairing the world through deep listening. The birthday of the world. In the beginning, there was only the holy darkness, eternal silence, the Ein Sof, the source of life. This world, our world of 1,000 things, emerged from the heart of the holy darkness as a great ray of light. And then there was an accident. The vessels containing the light of the world, the wholeness of the world, fell, broke, shattered, and scattered into 1,000 fragments of light. Each ray fell into the events and all people, where they remain deeply hidden until this very day. The whole human race is a response to this accident. We are here because we are born with the capacity to find the hidden light in all events and all people, to lift it up and make it visible once again. This is the work to restore the innate wholeness of the world, one heart at a time. And this task is called Tikkun Olam in Hebrew, restoring the world. Tikkun Olam is a collective task. It involves all people who have ever been born, all people presently alive, and all people yet to be born. We are the healers of the world. The creation story I just shared is an adaptation from Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, sharing the story, the birthday of the world that was passed on to her from her grandfather, who was part of the Jewish mystical tradition called Kabbalah. She said that the main question from this worldview is, how would I live if I were exactly what was needed to heal the world? She credits this teaching that she grew up hearing with helping her become a healer. Now, by healer, she's not talking about her profession. She is a doctor. She's a pediatrician. But her vocation as a listener. She shared that doctors thought we could cure everything, but it turns out that we can only cure a small amount of human suffering. The rest needs to be healed, and that's different. So she began offering these deep listening sessions for when doctors ran out of treatments, such as people who suffer from chronic illnesses or conditions that are too complicated. And soon her practice was full. She reflected that our listening creates a sanctuary for the homeless parts within the other person. To deeply listen to another is to provide a home, a safe harbor for their whole story and being. It is a gift we can offer to one another, to be present with parts of us that maybe have not been able to be shared, have not been welcomed in casual conversations, or even perhaps we thought could not be loved. In my work as an environmental educator, I often started each program in the outdoors with the same exercise. Whether they were children or adults, I had invited them to close their eyes or rest their eyes and to hold up their paws. And we sat for a full minute of silence, and the only instruction was, each time you heard a unique noise, to raise one finger, and at the next noise, to raise another. Would you practice this with me right now? Close your eyes or find something to rest your eyes on in the sanctuary space. For those on Zoom, you can do the same. And hold up your paws and just listen. And each time you hear a unique noise, put up one finger. I want to welcome you back to the room. If your eyes were closed, you can blink them open. How many people heard at least 5 sounds? 5 unique sounds. Lots of, okay. 6 sounds, 7. Anything stand out? What did you hear? Feel free to shout it out. Oh, we heard child. What a gift. What a gift to have you in our midst, young one. Thank you for being here. We hear you. We see you. Yes, we do. What else did you hear? Laughter. Did anybody hear the silence or stillness? Did anybody hear their own breathing or their own heartbeat? I love to use this exercise because it was transformational. It helped to bring our focus into attention. And this is one of the requirements of deep listening, to be here now and to open with all of our senses. We know that listening is not just auditory, right? That most of what we communicate happens in our body language, happens if we're holding tension, if we're making eye contact, if we're open to the other person, if we're thinking about something else while they're talking, if we're answering them before they've shared, like our poor Mr. Bear. Today we've talked a lot about how deep listening is something we do for another. We heard it from Mr. Bear, Marilee's wonderful, the well-posed question. It reminds us of how to do this. I shared at the beginning that Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen developed a professional listening practice, but I didn't share why. And I'd like to move into that in this section of the message. Dr. Remen suffers from Crohn's disease. And when she was young, she was told that this disease would significantly shorten her life expectancy. There was very few treatments, and as a pediatrician, she tried to balance the needs of having gastrointestinal mayhem, fatigue, and unknown symptoms with trying to do her work. Listening to her own story of dealing with chronic illness and pain is actually where she found her gift to offer deep listening, her tikkun olam, her unique repair of the world for others. I find this to be what Quaker author Parker Palmer calls letting your life speak. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, he says, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. This word vocation, it's one of my favorites, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about that to give you some context. Now, the word vocation comes from the root words voice, to hear a call, to be invited. About 15 years ago, I was working in career services. I was asked to develop an internship program for a small environmental liberal arts college, and I just dove in. I was ambitious, I was young, and I was meeting with National Geographic and NASA, the Field Museum of Chicago, and environmental law and policy centers, and students would come in and I'd just tell them about these great opportunities that we develop, these partnerships. You can go here and intern and build your career. And they were like, oh, that's really a good internship for somebody. I'm looking for this. And I'm like, okay, you want to figure out how to bring organic, sustainable agriculture to downtown Chicago. Okay, yep, there's ways to get into that, sure. And that's what you want to do. And this is what you're interested in. After several years of failed attempts to try to connect students with these great internship and career opportunities, I shifted my practice to listening. And what I was listening for was the spark. And it literally worked every time. When I saw them light up, their eyes were dancing, their voices were animated. This is what I can do to change the world. This is not what I want to do to make a living. This is what I want to make a life. And when I finally began to listen to those and began to then share with them about things that could help with the building blocks towards that, we began to have a lot more success in working together. These young people that I was working with asked about impact more than income. I was trained to center income and career opportunities as what they would be looking for. So I began to do some research, and I found that I was not alone in this, that there was a new and growing movement of college career centers that were beginning practices such as walking the labyrinth to help young people to deeply listen to this vocational discernment, to reduce stress of trying to choose the right major, to saying, when I move from my center, where do I go? They were developing practices that allowed people to do values-based internships and career experiences to begin to assess career and life happiness around making a difference. I developed this whole proposal, and at the center of it was this idea of vocation. As Parker Palmer says, vocation does not come from willfulness, it comes from listening. That insight is hidden in the word vocation itself, which is rooted in the Latin for voice. Vocation does not mean a goal I pursue, it means a calling that I hear, and I must listen for the truth and values at the heart of my own identity. And I took this to our new CFO and college president who came from international business backgrounds, and I was just seeing the awe and wonder that they had for this new pedagogy, their eyes big, their mouths slightly ajar as they said, nope. The nope of that proposal set in motion, it's a long story, but it really set in motion my yes to ministry, my yes to believing that each and every one of us has a divine spark, that each and every one of us is enough and we are needed in this world, that your being matters. That was what led me down this road to find my vocation, because you see, when I was sitting there with those students, I always felt a little bit like a fraud. Here I was asking them to tell me about their spark, and I knew I loved my job, and it had benefits, and it was stable. But there was something more, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I wasn't in my vocation. Now I know. Now, there's two parts to this vocation. Frederick Buechner says that vocation is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And one of the things that I've learned over time is that we also must listen to the world's deep hunger. I'll give you an example. I had a student, and she was getting into sustainable community development. And she was going to build this whole sustainable community development around veganism. And she was very, very passionate that the methane produced by animals and the amount of rainforest being destroyed, that we could begin to address climate change by moving into these communities that were supporting a plant-based diet. And it was very exciting. And she went and she presented this, and there was a contingency of Native Americans in the audience, and they raised their hand and said, wait a second, our cultural identity is based on our local food system, which includes eating meat. And our identity and our beings have been discouraged, and so much has been taken away from us. This doesn't work for us. And she kind of doubled down on it. She's like, but veganism. And I was like, we forgot to listen, right? And we're taking away someone else's agency by maybe trying to just hear where our deep gladness falls or where our deep answers. So it's really a conversation between our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meeting. Often when we talk about vocation, this calling in the world, People see it as synonymous with our professions, see it with organizing, see it with community building. But I want to share another teaching, the teaching of the Four Hills, because I think this is especially important and one that we have lost over time. The teaching of the Four Hills is one in which we recognize that there are four hills of our lives. Now, we still have this, mainstream culture still has this whole over the hill thing. You turn 40 and your organs are depleting and everything's downhill from there. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from, and many cultures still have the four hills that they teach about. So the first hill of infancy, what is our vocation? What is our work? To be nurtured, right? To be cared for, to be held, to be fed, to bring perspective and joy. Childhood, our vocation is to see every little thing and ask about it. Our world is small and our imaginations are big. Our job is to learn safety. Our calling is to know what is all around us. Adulthood, this fourth hill, this one that's often talked about in the over the hill. Adulthood being a time where our vocation is truly to give. Giving in so many ways, giving in your work, giving to your family. And then part of that work is also to know what you need to sustain that so that we don't run out. And the fourth hill is elderhood. And the way this has been taught to me and described to me is that as you are walking on that fourth hill, you look back and you listen to all that your life has spoken to you. And you look back and you can see all the coming generations, those that are here and those are yet to come. And it is in that time that your vocation, your calling, is to recall your message, the one message that you have that the world is hungry for. To take the time to gather that and to share it. And if you are on the first, second, or third hill of your life, your job is to listen. Deep listening allows for us to practice our vocation, not just listening to another, but listening for what our life must speak. And this is being at home in our stories. Perhaps it's well said in the Hinduism greeting, Namaste. The divine in me meets the divine in you. And sometimes, like Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, our deep gladness that meets the world's deep hunger is a gladness that comes from knowing a woundedness, and knowing our woundedness and knowing what we don't want, what isn't healing in that spot, so that our work and our vocation can actually come from what is sometimes called the broken parts of our being, that these two are what our life is speaking and where the healing of the world may commence. Perhaps we were made for these times. Perhaps we are the ones we've been waiting for. In the Soul Matters packet that we used this month, this quote was shared. That sacred space of being deeply listened to isn't just calling us home. It is home. We don't have conversations. We are our conversations. Listening literally constructs the world we live in and whom we become.